During the Edo period, there was a nightmare that all villains feared. Any criminal caught by Onihei would be executed. However, Kumehachi was an exception. Despite severe torture, he refused to betray his accomplices. Onihei admired Kumehachi for his loyalty and often brought food and drinks to talk with him across the wall. Soon, a group of ruthless robbers began to commit frequent violent crimes. They left no useful clues at the scene except for a wooden plaque. When everyone was at a loss, Kumehachi became suspicious upon hearing the name Tanbei of Chikashira. He was sure these were imposters. At 17, Kumehachi had been taken in by Tanbei of Chigashira, who taught his followers that although they were criminals, they must follow 3 rules. Do not kill, do not steal from the poor, and do not assault women. Kumehachi adopted these principles as his life's creed, and Tanbei became his guiding light. However, the impetuous young Kumehachi broke one of these rules and was caught red-handed by Tanbei. No explanation was accepted, and he was expelled. Since then, Kumehachi strictly adhered to the 3 rules. Unable to bear the impostors tarnishing Tanbei's name, he asked Onihei to temporarily release him to capture the real culprits. Unexpectedly, Onihei agreed. After gaining his freedom, Kumehachi did not flee. He deliberately provoked a man who was abducting a woman and swiftly broke his neck. He believed that the fake Tanbei, hearing of this, would want to recruit someone with his skills. Instead of the imposters, the real Tanbei, whom he had not seen for 15 years, appeared. They vividly remembered their past. Tanbei did not hold Kumehachi's past mistakes against him and invited him to join again. The identity plaque was just a ploy to fool Onihei. As for the 3 iron rules of the thieves, they were merely impulsive words of youth. At that moment, the principles that Kumehachi had held so dearly collapsed. He desperately suppressed his sense of loss but managed to extract the location of Tanbei's hideout from him. The very next day, as the leader was gathering the thieves to commit another crime, Onihei and his men suddenly burst into the room. For such vicious criminals, Onihei skipped the trial and executed them on the spot. The leader tried to flee amid chaos but was stopped by Kumehachi. He could hardly believe that his once ideal role model had turned into a despicable rogue. Perhaps even the leader hadn't realized until that moment why he had become what he once despised the most. After the mission, Onihei did not send Kumehachi back to prison. Instead, Onihei's organization, Arson Thief Control, gained a new undercover agent. In an alley, a man discovered a beautiful woman who appeared to be struggling to breathe, seemingly oppressed. Just as he was about to help her, a group suddenly appeared. It turned out to be a trap, and the thieves had already targeted his substantial amount of gold coins. To keep their crime hidden, the man was tragically killed with a knife. Elsewhere, Onihei heard that the Hattori family often harassed merchants at Sakura Manor. Disguised, he returned there to pay respects to his deceased master and unexpectedly ran into his old friend Kishi. After 20 years apart, childhood memories flooded back. They had trained together at this dojo, and both had feelings for Miss Ofusa next door. Neither dared to confess their love, fearing they would lose their chance if rejected. For 2 penniless young men, marrying Ofusa seemed impossible. They made a pact not to pursue her first, and although neither broke it, they could only watch as Ofusa married into the Omiya family. Now nearly 40, Kishi was still single. That evening, while Onihei intended to gather some evidence, he met an old acquaintance, Hiko, a local informant familiar with all the powers in the area. Hiko revealed that the Hattori family were scoundrels running a lucrative gambling operation and often forced Ronin to collect protection money under threat of violence. Kakunosuke Hattori's wife, a formidable woman skilled in gambling and drinking, was also called Ofusa. Shocked by the revelation, Onihei still asked Hiko to help gather evidence of Kakunosuke's crimes. Soon, Hiko brought reliable information that Kakunosuke was planning to rob a large shop and had enlisted Hiko to recruit some ruthless Ronin. That evening, Onihei led his men to raid Kakunosuke's house. Upon hearing this, Kishi hurried over, unable to believe that Ofusa had become such a woman. On the day of the interrogation, neither Onihei nor Kishi appeared. They stayed hidden in a room quietly learning everything. It turned out that Ofusa planned to use others to eliminate the Omiya family. After marrying into the Omiya family, she initially lived a wealthy life and thought it would continue. However, her husband's brother harbored ill intentions. Not only did her unborn child die unexpectedly, but her husband also died in an accident. The brother naturally took over the Omiya family, and Ofusa's life changed dramatically. She was burdened with all the hard work and faced constant harassment from her brother-in-law. Soon, she was labeled as a bringer of bad luck by the family, and with just a bit of travel money, her brother-in-law kicked her out. When she struggled to return to her parental home, She discovered it had been sold to the shogunate. Kakunosuke, seeing Ofusa was attractive, took her in. Over time, she realized the true nature of the world around her. As for planning the robbery of the Umiya shop, Ofusa felt no remorse towards her deceased husband. At that moment, both Onihei and Kishi remembered the simple and kind girl she once was. Kishi could no longer suppress his emotions and burst out. But when he faced Ofusa, he found himself unable to speak. He stood there for a long time. The two young men who once dreamed of achieving their goals through swordsmanship had also disappeared from that moment on. This man douses himself with perfume every day. Once he's ready, he becomes a ruthless assassin. Hanshiro has been an assassin for over 20 years without a single failure. However, this time an unexpected issue arises because his target is Onihei. When his attempt fails, Hanshiro immediately retreats without hesitation. This failed attempt merely serves as an excuse for him to demand a higher bounty. Although the employer readily doubles the bounty, he also threatens to replace Hanshiro at any time. Hanshiro was, in fact, a tragic figure. At 18, his parents died unexpectedly due to a dispute with a business partner. Since then, he often experienced hallucinations of being covered in blood. Only by applying perfume could he mask the imaginary scent of blood. Osaki, a servant at his lodgings, regularly offered warm meals, but Hanshiro never accepted the kindness. In the world of samurai, a man who could not avenge was not considered a true man. Yet, the persistent Osaki never gave up, caring for him despite the landlord's curses. Perhaps touched by Osaki's gentleness, the concept of family began to take root in Hanshiro's mind. However, Onihei was no ordinary man. From their initial encounter, he was able to discern the attacker was not a woman based on the strength of the attack and the distinct aroma. Kumehachi, as an undercover agent, also played a role. Based on the clues he provided, Onihei quickly traced the source of the perfume. It was rumored that a Ronin would purchase it every 3 months, and it was about time for another purchase. As Onihei suspected, Hanshiro indeed appeared at the shop soon after. However, the samurai lying in ambush were no match for him, and Hanshiro seized the opportunity to escape the encirclement. At the time, Hanshiro was furious and overheard the landlord abusing Osaki. Osaki was used to such treatment, being just a servant unable to change her situation. However, Hanshiro killed the landlord and then hid with Osaki in an abandoned temple. Hanshiro planned to complete one last job, collect the payment, and then flee far away with Osaki. This was all overheard by Kumehachi, who was hiding under the floor. On hearing this, Onihei also formed a plan. If not resolved quickly, Hanshiro might harm others to earn travel money. Onihei deliberately booked a hotel to create the simplest assassination opportunity for the killer. The hotel owner, Mori, readily agreed to the arrangement. Meanwhile, the fugitive lovers prepared themselves. Osaki gave Hanshiro a protective amulet, the only keepsake from her mother. Onihei then boldly walked through the town alone. Hanshiro fell for the trap and entered the hotel, eagerly bursting into the room to strike with his sword. However, his previous reckless fighting style had vanished. After a few exchanges, Onihei disarmed him. Now, Hanshiro also had a reason not to die. Unexpectedly, as he reached the doorway, he was struck down by Mori, the hotel owner, who had indirectly caused his father's death. According to samurai custom, Mori's act killing Hanshiro was justified. Ironically, a man imprisoned by his past was killed by that very past, just as he tried to live in the present. Considering Mori's old age and the fact that the deceased was involved in violent crimes, Onihei allowed the elderly couple to leave the city, with the possibility to return when things calmed down. Unaware of any of this, Osaki still foolishly waited on the bridge for Hanshiro, who had promised to take her away to a new life. This peculiar thief even sought connections to surrender. The woman specifically asked Onihei to behead her publicly. Her intention was simple: to boost the career of someone she knew. It turned out Omasa had become an accomplice in a murder case. She disguised herself as a wealthy merchant's servant and helped thieves empty the merchant's treasures. Unexpectedly, a girl under her care witnessed everything. The leader, Genpachi, fearing exposure, killed the girl. This caused a conflict between Omasa and the others. However, these treasures did not satisfy Genpachi's greed. He planned to commit a larger crime in 5 days, intending to wipe out a family. Omasa was a traditional thief, adhering to 3 old rules, and was deeply guilty about the girl's death. With no other option, she approached Onihei to prevent the tragedy. However, the cautious Genpachi would only notify his crew of the meeting point right before the act, and they had no fixed hideout to raid. Onihei had to take a risk and let Omasa continue her undercover work, sending the spy Hiko for backup. Everyone could see that Onihei and Omasa had an unusual relationship. In fact, they had known each other for 20 years. Omasa's father was an interesting thief who openly ran a restaurant named Thief's Tavern. Young Onihei got along very well with the owner and often helped with the restaurant's business. At that time, Omasa was only 10 years old, a very gentle and kind child. However, one day, the owner was killed on the street in retaliation by an enemy, leaving Omasa to wander as an orphan. The next day brought new developments. Genpachi informed Omasa that the operation was moved up. Besides that, he did not reveal any useful clues. Omasa and Hiko had no choice but to risk following Genpachi to a suspected hideout at a post station. While Hiko went back to report, Omasa back into the house by an accomplice. Unbeknownst to them, the cautious Genpachi had his own trusted follower tailing them. By the time Onihei arrived at the scene, it was already deserted. According to the innkeeper, the girl had just been carried away in a box. However, Omasa was no ordinary woman. She used a hairpin to pierce her arm and left a trail of blood on the ground. Onihei and Hiko followed the blood trail, fearing that Omasa might bleed to death if they were too late. They reached a house and Onihei asked Hiko to go back for reinforcements, not wanting to involve his old friend in the danger. Onihei then used a bamboo pole to vault over the wall. After stealthily eliminating several guards, he located Omasa. Sadly, he was a moment too late. Omasa had been assaulted by the thieves. Onihei had just hidden Omasa under the floor when the alerted thieves approached. Although their swordsmanship was mediocre, Onihei found himself outnumbered, fighting off dozens of thieves alone. As his strength waned and cold arrows continued to fly, Onihei was cornered. At this critical moment, the reinforcements called by Hiko arrived just in time. After a fierce battle, Genpachi and all the thieves were captured. Onihei worried that the scars on Omasa's arms would hinder her chances of marriage. Unexpectedly, Omasa's response surprised everyone. She decided to entrust her life to Onihei. The upright Chugo believed that love in the red light district never left the room. Unexpectedly, during a patrol, he opened the door of the Iroha tea house. From then on, he lost himself in the praises of Omatsu, gaining confidence despite being mocked as a coward. Over time, Chugo's love evolved from love at first sight to a deeper affection, and he squandered his father's inheritance. With great pain, he bid Omatsu a final farewell, feeling deep shame remembering his father's dying admonitions. However, Omatsu was not merely money-minded. She could see Chugo's sincere feelings. Upon learning the truth, she handed over her savings to Chugo and hoped he would return to chat with her in the future. After that, Chugo worked even harder, but his fervor raised suspicions in Onihei, who sent Kumehachi to secretly investigate. In fact, Omatsu had entertained a distinguished guest named Kawagoi, who had never touched her because she reminded him of someone he knew 20 years ago. When he learned that her beloved samurai was not wealthy, he generously tipped Omatsu. Before leaving, he advised her to cherish her current lover. Overwhelmed by guilt and gratitude, Chugo vowed to thank him in person one day. Meanwhile, Kumehachi overheard every detail of their private conversation. Upon learning the truth, the superior erupted in anger, as privately meeting during patrol was no trivial matter. However, Onihei did not blame Chugo. Instead, he assigned him to continue with clerical duties. Yet, just a few days later, Chugo's previously enthusiastic demeanor had vanished, replaced by a lifeless appearance. Onihei, seeing Chugo's dejected state, said nothing but gave a knowing smile, understanding it all without words. Without Omatsu, the days seemed endlessly long for Chugo. At night, he disguised himself and climbed over the wall. To avoid suspicion from his colleagues, he picked up a lantern and pretended to patrol. Once in a secluded corner, he quickly shed his official robe, excited about the imminent meeting with Omatsu. Just then, a figure in black flashed by. Initially, Chugo intended to ignore it, but his father's admonitions echoed in his ears. After a fierce internal struggle, he decided to stealthily follow. It turned out these individuals were part of a criminal organization responsible for multiple violent crimes. Chugo asked a neighboring monk to send a message for help, then secretly observed the actions of the man in black. Unexpectedly, Chugo fell asleep during his surveillance. When Onihei woke him, he praised Chugo for patrolling so late. After Onihei and his team burst into the room, they engaged in a fierce fight with the thieves. It turned out that the enemy leader was Kawagoi, who had previously tipped Omatsu. Injured, Kawagoi tried to escape through the back door but ran into Chugo, who was blocking the alley. However, Kawagoi died on the spot due to excessive blood loss, muttering Omatsu's name with his last breaths. It was revealed that Kawagoi was the notorious murderer Shigoro of Hakabi. Onihei credited Chugo with the accomplishment and personally rewarded him. Ashamed, Chugo not only refused the commendation but also confessed that he had encountered the case by accident while trying to meet Omatsu for a date. Onihei's words led Chugo to mistakenly believe that Onihei was the boss who had tipped Omatsu, marking the beginning of a more intense storyline. Onihei disclosed to Chugo that a certain official had shut down the Iroha tea house, and today was its last day of operation. He suggested Chugo might still have time to see Omatsu. However, fate was not on his side, and Chugo arrived too late. But, surprisingly, the tea house owner was waiting for Chugo and recognized his father, remarking that the father and son were cut from the same cloth. It turned out that Onihei had visited the tea house the previous day intending to settle Chugo's tab. He learned that Chugo's father was the Ronin who had once looked after her, and both father and son were known for running up tabs. Omatsu's fondness for Chugo seemed to be a twist of fate. At this moment, the principles his father had instilled in him were completely overturned. The next day, Chugo accompanied Onihei to visit his father's grave, but Onihei wanted some time alone and sent Chugo away with some money. Onihei had intended for a personal journey, but unexpectedly, he encountered thugs attacking a couple. Although he easily defeated the thieves, he found himself in trouble. It turned out the couple were workers from a sake brewery who had fled after stealing from their boss. After clearing up the misunderstanding, the local official, Jinzo, decided not to pursue the matter further. Unbeknownst to Onihei, an old man had been watching everything. He appeared silently beside Onihei and started praising his skillful swordsmanship. Wherever Onihei went, the old man seemed to appear unexpectedly. Wishing to keep his identity hidden, Onihei used Chugo's surname. After some conversation, they became acquainted. It turned out Zenpachi was a thief who, seeing Onihei's talent, wanted to partner with him for a heist, unaware that his prospective partner was actually an undercover cop. However, Onihei, looking for some amusement, agreed to join. Zenpachi, a traditionalist thief, reminded Onihei not to break 3 iron rules. Together, they targeted Ichigoro Masuya, a brewery owner who was corrupt and greedy and often withheld wages from his workers, who were also subjected to beatings for minor slip-ups. Zenpachi disguised himself as a traveling merchant and took his opportunity to sneak into the backyard and hide. That night, Onihei also slipped in effortlessly. Zenpachi's movements were not only swift, but his lock-picking skills were also expertly executed. Unexpectedly, the first thing Zenpachi did upon entering the vault was to defecate as a memento. Onihei knew that Zenpachi's claimed treasure hunting was a ruse. His real aim was to rescue the doomed couple. Just as the couple was about to be killed, Onihei skillfully overpowered several guards. Then, the 4 quickly grabbed the treasure and fled. However, they were soon discovered by local officials. They were hiding in the workers' dormitory. The oppressed workers, naturally, did not betray Onihei and the others. Zenpachi had anticipated that the workers would help them escape, a prediction born from his own deep understanding of suffering from abuse. During the escape, Zenpachi's chronic illness flared up, and he also lost a handbook he kept on him. He told the others to go ahead while he defiantly ran back for it. When Zenpachi found the handbook, a local official also found him. Unexpectedly, Onihei had followed him back. After quickly dispatching the pursuers, the two successfully escaped. As a reward, the couple received a significant share of the treasure, enough money for them to settle down elsewhere. The handbook was actually a secret manual on thievery written by Zenpachi, containing various lock-picking techniques and escape methods. Knowing his life was nearing its end, he had written all his knowledge into it. He handed this manual to Onihei, hoping his skills would not be lost. He also advised him not to provoke someone named Onihei. At this point, Jinzo and his men arrived, having become suspicious of Zenpachi during their time at the brewery. However, Onihei did not plan to reveal his identity, and even intended to use the opportunity to eliminate these corrupt officials. Just then, Chugo, returning from an outing, intervened and stopped the fight by revealing Onihei's identity, which terrified Zenpachi instantly. Jinzo also broke into a cold sweat, knowing that accepting bribes from the brewery owner was a crime punishable by death. But Onihei decided to spare him. The next day, Onihei found a doctor to cure Zenpachi's chronic illness, although Zenpachi had believed he only had 6 months to live. Consequently, he asked Onihei to arrest him in exchange for the bounty. Hearing this, the doctor turned around and explained that his illness was psychological, stemming from the anxiety of not finding an apprentice. He could live at least another decade. As they parted, Zenpachi still couldn't believe that Onihei, known for being ruthless, possessed such a unique charm. Legend has it that Naruto traveled to the Edo period. While playing with his friends, they were chased away by a water barrel shop owner. All the other children scattered, but Otomatsu stayed behind. He planned to buy 2 water barrels to take home, but nobody believed he could carry them since he couldn't use the shadow clone technique. Surprisingly, after paying for the barrels, Otomatsu smashed them into pieces with a rock while mocking the shop owner, saying he never mentioned he'd take them all at once. He left the broken pieces there, scoffing that the trash should stay. Onlookers were impressed, calling the boy a cunning debater who might grow up to be someone significant. Unbeknownst to them, years later, Otomatsu would change his name and join Shinbei of Viper in committing robberies. Even when caught, he could evade guilt with his slick debating skills, leaving the arson thief control helpless. This situation greatly troubled Onihei. Without quickly dismantling this gang, they would likely continue their crimes. Meanwhile, the mischievous Ojin accidentally knocked over a dining table. Ojin! Seeing no advantage gained, the daughter's slave came to the interrogation scene to see the stubborn criminal. Unexpectedly, the two were old acquaintances. However, Otomatsu shockingly shifted the blame to Onihei. It turned out that Onihei had been nearby when Otomatsu smashed the barrels. Otomatsu's stepfather was a gambler who would beat him and his mother after losing money. Living under someone else's roof, the mother and son dared not speak out, and neighbors also avoided trouble. Young Onihei, a righteous ronin, defeated the gambler and boldly announced his name. The cowardly gambler dared not retaliate. Before leaving, Onihei advised Otomatsu to seek him out if he faced more trouble. Unfortunately, the stepfather's abuse only worsened after a brief pause. Otomatsu reported this to the authorities, but an official dismissively said that domestic issues were hard to judge and sent him away. At that time, Onihei was away on a business trip to Kyoto, and the gatekeeper, judging by his humble clothes, did not let him in. That evening, the stepfather severely beat him again and blamed the mother for the report. Unable to endure it any longer, Otomatsu grabbed a sharp wooden stick and caused a severe incident. He thought this would mark a new beginning, but instead, his mother completely pushed him into an abyss. The boy with infinite potential was thus set on a path of no return. While being taken back to his cell, Otomatsu saw Ojin playing and harbored malicious thoughts. He gleaned from a guard that Ojin was a child abandoned by thieves. Seizing the opportunity, Otomatsu shouted the truth at Ojin, who believed it and thought it was her fault for knocking over the dining table. That night, Ojin disappeared. Despite the full mobilization of arson thief control, no clues were found, and the lady was inconsolable. Seeing everyone busy, Otomatsu was extremely pleased. Fortunately, Onihei finally found Ojin drowning in the river. On the day of the trial, Otomatsu eagerly anticipated seeing Onihei's reaction, but was disappointed to see him appear calm and untroubled. It turned out Ojin had sneaked to the riverbank just to catch a sweetfish for her father. Although she was not Onihei's biological daughter, the love he showed her was genuine. Onihei felt guilty about the situation, wishing someone had paid more attention to Otomatsu earlier. Realizing his end was near, Otomatsu had a sudden change of heart and disclosed the hideout of Shinbei of Viper. Onihei had planned to offer him a position as a secret agent, hoping he would reform. However, Otomatsu, having lost all attachment to the world, gave up his chance to survive. As they parted forever, Onihei understood the regrets in Otomatsu's heart. Every good friend has the properties of a miracle cure. Once it was confirmed that his wife had left, the effects kicked in instantly. One moment, Onihei was bedridden. The next, his illness seemed completely gone. Revived by alcohol, Onihei was back in high spirits the next day. However, when it came time to smoke, his wife couldn't find his pipe anywhere. Onihei instantly suspected that this was no ordinary incident. He feared that next time, it might be his head that was missing. He asked his wife to keep this a secret and planned to investigate the real culprit discreetly. That evening, a friend invited Onihei to watch the fireworks in celebration. Observing the skinny boatman, Kishi whispered doubtfully if such a frail man could handle the boat. Hearing this, the boatman vigorously rowed, and the small boat shot out like an arrow. This impressed Onihei, who admired the boatman's skill. Amidst such beautiful scenery, both men naturally pulled out their tobacco pipes. Onihei immediately recognized his own pipe in the boatman's possession, but he pretended as if nothing was amiss. The next day, he instructed Kumehachi to secretly investigate the matter. It turned out that the two were old acquaintances and had collaborated before. Tomogoro had once been a formidable thief. After retiring, he returned to bustling Edo and became a boatman. Led by Kumehachi, the conversation shifted to old professions. Tomogoro got carried away, revealing that upon returning to Edo, he had heard of a formidable man named Onihei. A few days ago, on a whim, he had stolen Onihei's tobacco pipe. Onihei found the whole story amusing, and noticed Kumehachi's hesitant demeanor, wanting to intercede but not daring to speak. Then, Onihei devised a plan. He sent Kumehachi to brag to Tomogoro with his own medicine box, and challenged him under the guise of comparing skills. If Tomogoro could replace the tobacco pipe with the medicine box, he would give him 30 pieces of gold. Tomogoro gladly accepted, seeing it as an easy opportunity. Late that night, Tomogoro indeed took the medicine box and returned the pipe. The next morning, Onihei seized the opportunity to reprimand his subordinates. He warned that if other thieves heard of this incident, arson thief control would lose its authority and become a laughingstock. He ordered everyone to remain vigilant at all times. That evening, Onihei went to have a chat with Tomogoro, whose face clearly showed his happiness. On a whim, Tomogoro even called a large fish to join the fun. This fish, having lived in the river for about 70 to 80 years, usually stayed hidden and only appeared for familiar faces. Onihei also planned to show Tomogoro something special. After the two arrived at a tavern, he casually took out an ancestral pipe. Tomogoro was momentarily speechless, but Onihei did not hold his theft against him. He simply redeemed the medicine box. A boastful Ronin entered and challenged the dojo, but unexpectedly, the master and the Ronin stood for an hour without drawing their swords. Just as the disciples were losing patience, both sheathed their swords and declared a draw. Young Onihei, being impulsive, grabbed a wooden sword and charged, only to be easily defeated by Matsuoka. Afterwards, Kishi suggested they go out for some fun, but Onihei, being short on money, had to go home to ask his father for funds. However, his stepmother was a very harsh woman, fearing that the children of her husband's concubines might inherit the family business. She always found ways to make life difficult for Onihei. Onihei knew this was his father's weakness, so he always kept quiet about it. Yet, the stepmother had no children of her own, meaning the inheritance would eventually be Onihei's planned. Back then, Onihei, Kishi, and Hiko were notoriously unruly. They even dared to fight when they found a gambling house's dealer cheating. Onihei had no grand ambitions for the future, and even considered joining a thief-owned tavern to become a thief himself. Unexpectedly, the next day, Matsuoka, who had challenged the dojo, became a guest instructor. Onihei naturally wanted to avenge his defeat from the previous day, but sheer enthusiasm was no match for a calm samurai. After being defeated again, Onihei became Matsuoka's biggest fan. Both teachers noticed the student's progress, but the dojo master still worried about not having a successor. Onihei's relentless spirit was commendable, but his swordsmanship, fueled purely by anger, would not make him a top warrior. After learning about Onihei's family situation, Matsuoka formed his own opinions. That evening, Onihei and Kishi faced retaliation from a gambling den. Matsuoka joined the fray without a word. The common thugs stood no chance against him. He used the back of his blade to teach Onihei the benevolence of a samurai. Afterward, Matsuoka took Onihei aside for a chat. Their backgrounds were strikingly similar, and Matsuoka, a cynical street bully in his youth, saw his younger self in Onihei. He sincerely advised Onihei not to follow in his footsteps. However, it wasn't long before news came from home. The stepmother decided to let a cousin inherit the family business. Disgusted by her behavior, Onihei stormed out, only to meet Hiko recruiting for a robbery. A roaming thief needed 2 helpers to row a boat and promised a share of 50 taels of reward. Desperate to prove himself and tired of his stepmother's disdain, Onihei believed this money would make him independent. On the appointed day, his accomplices arrived on time, but unexpectedly, the leader of the thieves was none other than teacher Matsuoka, who was deeply disappointed in Onihei. After that, Onihei never saw Matsuoka again, but to this day, he often thinks of his mentor. If that incident hadn't happened, perhaps Onihei wouldn't have become the man he is today. Every carpenter has a secret skill up their sleeve. When working, they often leave a trick in place. If a homeowner dares to withhold payment, the carpenter can team up with thieves to use this backdoor to empty the homeowner's treasures. They then disappear like smoke, which is why people usually don't withhold payment from carpenters. However, Onihei knew an even more skilled carpenter. A group of children had broken a set of expensive smoking tools and a chessboard, but this carpenter could not only instantly repair the box but also volunteered to reinforce it. Wasuke, the carpenter, had once been a notable figure. He returned to Edo to meet his old friend Magokichi. A familiar foreman suggested that Wasuke, now of age, should settle down and marry, but Wasuke felt he did not deserve a wife. Meanwhile, thieves learned of Wasuke's return to Edo. They knew of a paper store where Wasuke had left a back strike it rich. However, Wasuke declined due to a claimed heart condition. Hiko, a spy in Edo, discovered that an old acquaintance had returned. Knowing Wasuke normally didn't act unless it was a major case, he secretly followed him. That evening, Wasuke and Magokichi's family had a joyful reunion. When the topic of Isotaro, only 19 and already assistant manager of the paper store, came up, Magokichi and his wife beamed with pride. They believed Isotaro had a limitless future. As soon as Isotaro left the room, Magokichi and his wife knelt down, asking Wasuke to acknowledge Isotaro as his son. In his youth, Wasuke went to work away from home, and his wife died from neglect, leaving him racked with guilt. Believing he was fated not to have a family, he gave his newborn son Isotaro to the childless Magokichi couple and swore over his wife's grave never to remarry. Now that Isotaro was an adult, it was time he knew his biological father. However, Wasuke still clung to his past and refused. Their conversation was overheard by Hiko, who was hiding outside. The next day, he met with Wasuke to catch up. Wasuke was unaware of Hiko's role as a spy, but revealed that he had long since retired from his questionable activities. The peaceful days did not last long. Wasuke accidentally discovered that Isotaro was not as successful as imagined. As the confidant of the old manager, he became a thorn in the side of the new manager. Just as Wasuke was preparing to leave, Isotaro saw his uncle outside the door. Since the old manager's death, Isotaro had been working even harder, but the new manager never acknowledged his achievements. From then on, he hoped for heavy snow, which would lessen the number of customers and give him a chance to rest. Wasuke could only optimistically encourage him, suggesting that diligent work might change the new manager's opinion. Unexpectedly, as soon as Isotaro returned to the store, his colleague found a large amount of gold coins in his box. The new manager's relentless questioning left Isotaro speechless. It was clear that this was a setup by the manager. Yet, if this news spread, his honest parents would be shamed. That night, the family received devastating news from the authorities. Isotaro had hanged himself to prove his innocence. The new manager continued to complain as if the life lost was unrelated to him. After a hastily arranged funeral, the devastated Magokichi couple drowned themselves in despair. Wasuke had planned to drown his sorrows in drink, but he accidentally overheard that the new manager was behind Isotaro's death. The next day, he contacted thieves to seek revenge. Wasuke easily opened the mechanism he had left behind, while Hiko, who was on surveillance, noticed something unusual. When he opened the door, he found only a wooden board instead of a person. Hiko reported the situation to Onihei, but unexpectedly, Onihei chose to stand down and not intervene. After the thieves broke into the vault, Wasuke's old illness flared up. Despite the severe pain, he managed to open the drawer and took all the non-monetizable contracts. The thieves, loaded with a boat full of gold coins, prepared to escape. However, as the boat reached under the bridge, Onihei and his men blocked their path. Wasuke suggested throwing the treasure overboard to lighten the load, as getting caught would mean certain death. The accomplices quickly threw the boxes of treasure into the river, causing the water's surface to reflect dazzling golden light. At that moment, Wasuke tore up the contracts, venting his anger and frustration. Four years later, the paper store closed down. Perhaps the gold and contracts Wasuke threw into the river were the critical factors leading to its closure. On a certain day, Onihei's wife Heisei received an invitation letter from her first love, but the content was threatening. If she refused to meet, he would personally visit her. It seemed that he held some leverage over her. After much deliberation, she decided to risk a meeting. Kondo, the inviter, clearly had ill intentions, likely aiming to extort money. However, the situation was more complicated than it appeared. In her youth, Heisei lived between Kondo's house on the left and Onihei's house on the right. As a naive girl, she couldn't resist the charming boy next door who constantly flirted with her. Under Kondo's sweet talking, Heisei's heart fluttered, and she secretly reciprocated his feelings. Eventually, they fell in love, crossing forbidden lines. However, it wasn't long before Kondo began frequenting the red light district, and his attitude towards Heisei drastically changed. He abandoned his position as head of the family and even deserted his elderly parents. One day, Kondo, along with a prostitute, stole a substantial amount of valuables and committed 3 murders while escaping. Devastated, Heisei became listless and spent her days idly in the yard. Her father also frequently worried about this issue. One day, seeing the neighbor always at a loss, Onihei struck up a conversation with him in a tavern. Despite learning that Heisei had been deceived and lost her chastity to a bad man, Onihei still proposed to her. Since then, Heisei has put that painful past behind and lived happily for over 20 years. Kondo intended to use this opportunity to humiliate Heisei, but seeing her resolute gaze, he choked back his mocking words. In reality, he was a facade. She feared that this villain would seek out Onihei, causing her husband to despise her. Unexpectedly, when Heisei returned home, a strange incident occurred. Just as she had stepped out, an old woman used a lie about Heisei being harmed to deceive the guard and kidnapped Ojun. After Heisei recounted the details of her outing, everyone concluded that it was a kidnapping orchestrated by Kondo. In the evening, Hiko brought good news. He had located the human trafficker's hideout. With Onihei away on business, all the pressure fell on Heisei. Arresting Kondo would surely lead to the revelation of all secrets, but for now, she could only hope for Onihei's forgiveness for her past mistakes. Heisei, no longer hesitating, instructed everyone to rescue Ojun. The arson thief control and spies mobilized in full force. With Kumehachi's coordination, they surrounded the cabin where Kondo was hiding. Omasa burst through the door and swiftly knocked out the old woman with a punch. To avoid any mishaps, she signaled the others to proceed with the capture as she exited. The spies, ruthless in their tactics, did not care about the thieves' lives and flushed them out with fire. The arson thief control, already positioned outside, easily arrested all the culprits. Kumehachi was named the MVP of the operation. Watching the mother and daughter reunite, everyone shed tears of emotion. Upon his return, Onihei immediately interrogated Kondo. However, the cunning old man still tried to provoke Onihei.
お前が女房はな、俺が初めての男ぞ。久江はな、今も昔もいい女よ。
Afterwards, Onihei acted as if nothing had happened, continually comforting his wife not to be sad and to let bygones be bygones. Without letting his wife interject, Onihei changed the subject, praising her cooking skills. Through this incident, Heisei realized a lesson. The virtue of a woman depends on the man. In an era of poor medical conditions, the birth of every infant was a battle against death. Perhaps fate played a cruel joke. The baby died shortly after birth due to an accident, and the mother passed away from excessive blood loss. When the father, who had been away on a case, returned home, he found his wife and daughter had passed, leaving him alone. Since then, Koyanagi seemed to have a changed soul. His previously steady swordsmanship became aggressive and wide-ranging. Beneath his gentle appearance, there was now a persistent, ominous aura. Onihei noticed all these changes. Recently, Koyanagi had been recklessly rushing to the forefront in battles, as if he was eager to die and reunite with his deceased wife and child. Onihei's guess was not wrong. Koyanagi harbored the same thoughts. While returning from his wife's memorial service, he happened to see a woman on a bridge, preparing to commit suicide with her child. Koyanagi immediately threw his umbrella to prevent the tragedy. However, the woman repeatedly pleaded with Koyanagi not to stop her, wishing only for early release from her sufferings. Nonetheless, Koyanagi arranged for the mother and daughter to stay at Hiko's inn. Despite this, the woman remained silent and unwilling to share her troubles. Koyanagi then asked Omasa to help soothe the woman's emotions. Perhaps because they were both women, Otaka finally let down her guard and shared her plight. She revealed that her husband had been arrested by the arson thief control 2 days earlier, and the one who arrested him was Koyanagi. Otaka had always believed that Matahachi was just a craftsman who made prayer beads. She had no idea that since the day her husband left home, he never returned. The night before last, an old man suddenly delivered a suicide note to her, revealing that Matahachi had once lived by stealing. To repay a debt of gratitude, he decided to make one last deal, suspecting that it might be dangerous. He had left the sealed suicide note at a friend's house, foreseeing the potential peril of his final venture. Upon hearing this, Koyanagi asked Omasa not to reveal the secret to Onihei for the time being, as he had his own plans for handling the situation. Unexpectedly, Koyanagi personally approached Matahachi to negotiate a deal. He offered to arrange a meeting with Matahachi's wife if he disclosed the hideout of his accomplices. When Koyanagi mentioned that Otaka had once attempted suicide but he had saved her, Matahachi began to waver. However, when they reached the bridge, Matahachi knocked the rope from Koyanagi's hands and jumped into the river, disappearing. When Onihei learned that the criminal had escaped, he ordered his subordinates to keep it quiet and took all the responsibility upon himself. The next morning, Koyanagi returned to arson thief control to apologize. He was detained in a cell for 6 months, during which he remained silent. Strangely, Matahachi did not attempt to meet Otaka after his escape. Onihei, using this as a reason, did not press charges for 6 months. Eventually, when the case could no longer be concealed and the time came for punishment, Onihei was unyielding. At that moment, Chugo hurriedly informed the prison that Matahachi had returned. He had not only captured the main culprit, Manzaburo, but had also taken responsibility for all the crimes. Afterwards, Onihei pardoned Koyanagi and released him, but also took the opportunity to admonish his subordinates. He told them that they could use the same strategy, but if they did not reach a certain mutual understanding with the criminal, they should be prepared to face imprisonment. There is a gang of thieves who leave behind the mark of Kitsunebi with each crime they commit. They are ruthless, never leaving any survivors. This group is shrouded in mystery, and the only person who knows them well is Omasa, who left the organization 10 years ago. She had once been in love with Matataro, the eldest son of the Kitsunebi leader, but romantic relationships were forbidden within the gang. After, they were forced to part tearfully. The leader died 4 years ago, but the organization still adhered to its strict rules. Matataro, a child born to a concubine, might not become the leader as the second son, Bunkichi, could likely take over. The woman who collapsed in front of the door before the incident was a typical infiltration tactic used by Kitsunebi. Omasa didn't know what had changed within the gang. To uncover the truth, she sought out Satagawa, a former leader who had retired. The old leader had passed the position to Matataro on his deathbed, and not long ago, Satagawa had seen him walking towards Ito with a grim expression. Despite this, Omasa refused to believe Matataro could become such a person. She left her address with Sadagawa, asking him to pass it on if he saw Matataro. Unbeknownst to them, all of this was observed by Ozan. The current Kitsunebi was involved in nothing good, and they even slaughtered former sub of the old leader. That night, the thieves killed Sadagawa, and using the address he had, found Omasa's home. When Bankichi opened the door, he found that Omasa had already fled, having heard the chaotic footsteps and guessed what was happening. However, outnumbered, cornered in an alley, Bankichi, also searching for Matataro, grabbed Omasa's face, believing that kidnapping his brother's former lover would force Matataro to show up. Just then, a samurai descended from above, kicking the arrogant Bankichi. But what was bound to be a bloody battle was interrupted by cries for help from a fire. Kitsunebi, realizing they had been tricked as the alley grew busier, was forced to flee the scene. It turned out that Bankichi had masterminded all the homicides. In the 4 years since the old leader passed away, Matataro, who adhered to principles, made only one deal. Bankichi not only challenged Matataro's identity but also had a frantic obsession with becoming the leader. Recently, he had started engaging in murderous plundering, tarnishing Kitsunebi's reputation and disrespecting the deceased leader. Despite multiple attempts to persuade his brother to cease his actions and teaching him that even thieves should have principles, Bankichi harbored a murderous intent. Knowing she couldn't change the facts, Omasa became Matataro's guide. The next day brought a turn of events. Osen was discovered by Matataro, while Hiko and Kumehachi chose another path to follow. Late at night, Matataro stealthily entered Bankichi's room. Despite his imminent death, Bankichi argued passionately, claiming Matataro's conservative methods were no longer suitable for the current era. Matataro asked his brother what kind of man he wanted to be. Bankichi dismissed the question, claiming Matataro never understood his feelings, and that everything he wanted had always belonged to Matataro, whether talent, skill, prestige, or women. Before he could finish, Bankichi suddenly rose to retaliate, and his followers took Omasa hostage. Matataro had no choice but to fight for his life. As Matataro was nearing exhaustion, reinforcements finally arrived. The thieves were no match for Onihei. Seeing the situation was lost, Bankichi decisively fled, with Matataro in hot pursuit. It wasn't long before Bankichi was cornered. Despite Matataro's offer of forgiveness, Bankichi still drew his knife, perhaps realizing at life's end that the fame and fortune he had clung to were merely fleeting. At that moment, Onihei and his men arrived. Omasa quickly explained that the gentleman was a righteous merchant who had killed Bankichi, the real second-generation leader of Kitsunebi. Onihei understood her meaning, thought for a moment, and then simply told the merchant to never return to Ito before letting him go. The story didn't end there. One day, Onihei brought Omasa bad news. The righteous merchant had contracted a severe illness in Kyoto and passed away. Before his death, he left a message wishing Omasa future happiness.